They say civilization begins where man tamed the chicken. But if you had found yourself in besieged Leningrad in the winter of 1942, you would have seen that civilization survived not because of factories, but because of chicken coops. Small sheds behind houses where women kept the last of the warmth. A few hens laying an egg every other day. Those eggs saved children. Back then, chicken warmth was more valuable than bread. When the front line passed through the villages of Ukraine and Belarus, the men left, and the women. The elderly and the birds remained in the yards. A chicken didn't require a tractor, didn't require fuel, just a little grain and care. It survived everything. Occupation, drought, even collectivization. It was the first and last line of food defense. Today, 80 years later, we are being led down that same road again, only more gently. Stores are full of plastic and gloss, but try to find an egg with a real yolk. Orange, thick, smelling of grass. It's impossible. Everything is standardized, sterile, patented. We leased our yards to the industry, and now we buy back what used to be born under our windows. Why? Because nature cannot be patented. You can't sell the sun, the air, the rain if people know how to use them. That's why the old breeds, the Orlovs, the Russian whites, the Yurlov crowers, have disappeared from advertisements, but not from memory. Once in every yard in the Moscow region in Siberia, people knew, if you don't want to depend on the collective farm, get a dozen Yurlovs. Their meat smelled like the broth of childhood, and their crowing woke the village instead of the radio. These breeds lived for decades and fed the family without requiring commercial feed. In the 1960s, breeding stations operated across the country, where chickens were selected not for growth speed, but for resistance to frost and disease. In Kazakhstan and Central Asia, they kept leghorns, not the factory ones, but steppe ones, capable of laying eggs at 113 degrees Fahrenheit. And in the Belarusian marshes, they raised zozulkas and pastrushkas that fed on worms and frogs. All these chickens were part of the biosphere, not a marketing product. Their bodies worked like a perfect biofactory, converting herbs, insects, and grain into high-quality protein. A single egg from a home-raised hen contains up to 7 grams of complete protein, the full range of essential amino acids, and up to 600 micrograms of carotenoids if the bird roams the yard. That's 4 times more than factory poultry because sunlight activates the synthesis of vitamin D3, and fresh grass provides lutein, a pigment that protects vision. Even the shells of such eggs are thicker because chickens peck at sand and gravel, getting natural calcium. Everything the industry tries to replace with additives, nature creates for free. But business cannot tolerate free. Since the early 1990s, corporations have reshaped poultry farming. Instead of local breeds, there are F1 hybrids, dependent on patent lines. They lay 350 eggs a year, but only under ideal conditions, with expensive feed and constant antibiotics. They cannot be bred independently. The offspring degenerate. It's a biological trap, an economic hook. Farmers became customers forever. Thus, the idea of self-sufficiency was killed. But we still have knowledge. On the outskirts of Russia, in the old villages of the Bryansk region in Altai, you can still find people for whom the chicken coop is like a family heirloom. They don't count eggs, they count generations. There you can see how kukushkas and chernushkas survive without electricity, warming chicks under an old box with a kerosene lamp. This is true resistance. After all, agricultural independence begins not with a tractor, but with a chick. The scientific truth is simple. The more a chicken moves, the denser its muscle fibers, and the higher the content of creatine and B vitamins. When a bird roams free, its metabolism of methionine, an amino acid responsible for liver detoxification and tissue regeneration, is activated. This means an egg from a free-roaming hen literally heals. That's why our grandmothers didn't have the word superfood. They had broth. Practical advice: if you want to start the path to food freedom, start with 3 chickens. Give them a perch, some ash for bathing, and a bucket of water. Even without commercial feed, they will find their own food: leftover porridge, vegetable tops, insects. In just a month, you'll realize that no inflation is scary when breakfast grows in your yard. We're used to thinking that a crisis is an external threat, but the real crisis is forgotten knowledge. As long as we remember it, we have a chance. Knowledge survives only if we pass it on. When people say the village is backward, I smile, because it was the village that survived all the collapses of empires, currencies, and ideologies. The city storefront changes, but in the heartland, everything works according to the ancient law of survival. What you plant is what you eat. What you raise is what you saved. And if there are real instructions for food independence kept in archives somewhere, they are not documents with stamps, but old notebooks with grandmother's recipes, where next to notes about jam are remarks like, "The Yurloff is crowing louder, frost is coming," or, "If the shell is thick, there's enough nettle in the feed." These marginalia are the code of food sovereignty. Recall how in the early 1990s, when the shelves went empty, the villages again became lifebuoys. In Kazakhstan, in the Kuban, in the Pskov region, in the Carpathians, it was private backyards that pulled the country through. Where there was a chicken coop, there was no hunger. Domestic poultry turned waste into life. Chickens ate potato peels, spilled grain, grasshoppers grass, and in return gave eggs, feathers, manure, a whole microsystem of survival. It was an economy without banks, without loans, but with a logic that no crisis can destroy. Today we are told that everything natural is expensive. But let's calculate. The average chicken eats about 4.2 ounces of feed a day. If you feed it scraps and grass for at least half of that, the savings will be up to 40%. In return, you get about 20 eggs a month. The cost of one home-raised egg with proper organization is 2 to 3 rubles. A store-bought egg costs 10, 15, and inside it is not protein, but a periodic table, residues of antibiotics, growth stimulants, artificial pigments. Why? Because in factory conditions, birds are kept under lights 16 hours a day. No sleep, no sun, no earth under their feet. Their livers don't have time to detoxify, and all the toxins settle in the yolk. Now imagine, you feed this to your family daily, thinking you're giving them a healthy breakfast. The industry doesn't want you to know this. Since the 2000s, companies have been patenting not only chicken hybrids, but also feed compositions, vitamin lines, even bird behavior algorithms. Their goal is dependency. Every new generation of factory chickens is sterile, infertile. A farmer cannot simply leave eggs for hatching. He has to buy young stock again. This isn't poultry farming, it's renting life. Unlike the old breeds that were passed down like an inheritance, in the Belgorod region, for example, lines of Pestrushka steppe, bred before the revolution, still survive. They lay fewer eggs, but they do so consistently and without additives. The biology of these birds is an economic lesson in itself. Look at the metabolism of a domestic hen. Body temperature around 106 degrees Fahrenheit. Pulse, 250 beats per minute. This means its metabolism is 7 times more active than a human's. Every grain it pecks turns into energy with almost no waste. Free-range chickens eat up to 60 types of plants, seeds, and insects, meaning their diet is naturally balanced. Methionine for feather growth, lysine for egg mass, cysteine for immunity. Add a little ash and calcium from shells, and you have a complete formula for life. What corporations call commercial feed is created by nature itself if you just let a chicken be a chicken. And here the exposure begins. In Soviet times, every district had a zootechnical station where recommendations on poultry keeping were issued. They knew the chicken's main strength is its ability for self-regulation. If the temperature drops below zero, the bird slows its metabolism, ruffles its feathers to keep warm. If it's hot, it spreads its wings, evaporating moisture through its comb. In this simple mechanism lies the genius of evolution. No smart farm can compete with millions of years of selection. But modern business tries to replace this with microcontrollers, climate systems, and smart feeders. And what happens? The power goes out, and everything dies. In the village, it's the opposite. The simpler, the more reliable. Old housewives knew, for chickens to lay, they need sun and peace. Not lamps and hormones, but the certainty that tomorrow there will be grain and water. Surprisingly, stress reduces egg production by 30–40%. Therefore, domestic birds, which are not frightened by noise or forced to live in cramped conditions, give more eggs than factory ones if you count by years of life. Yes, an industrial chicken gives a record 350 eggs in a year, and then it's discarded. A domestic one, if not tortured, lives 5 or 7 years and brings those same 1,1200 eggs over its lifetime, but without waste or death on a conveyor belt. And another truth that's hidden: the real taste of an egg depends on the bioavailability of carotenoids and omega-3 acids. When a chicken walks on grass and eats greens, omega-3 levels can reach 350 milligrams per 100 grays of yolk. For factory ones, it's 5 times less. Therefore, a home egg is not just more nutritious, it balances human lipid metabolism and reduces the risk of heart disease. It's no wonder our ancestors gave children raw eggs when they had a cold. It was their immunomodulator, no worse than what's in a pharmacy. Practical advice for those who want to regain control of their plate: start with a microfarm. You don't need an acre. 32 square feet and the desire are enough. Build a coop from old boards, insulate it with straw. Ash instead of shampoo for chickens helps with parasites and replenishes minerals. Add chopped nettles, dried carrots, and crushed shells to the feed. Once a week, a little apple cider vinegar in the water. It's an antiseptic, a source of potassium and iron. You'll be surprised how quickly the birds adapt. In Central Asia, for example, they still practice sand baths. Chickens bathe in a mixture of sand and ash to get rid of parasites. In the mountains of the Caucasus, they add garlic and oregano, natural antibiotics, to the feed. And in Siberia, in winter, they give them boiled potatoes and oat scraps, cheap and nutritious. All these methods have been proven for centuries and don't require a gram of chemistry. The economic paradox is that this very simplicity makes you invisible to the system. As long as you buy feed and chicks, you're a customer. When you raise them yourself, you're independent. And independence in the 21st century is the most dangerous word for corporations. That's why television won't show you a farmer from Vitebsk who has 20 chickens and zero debt. Because it's not a story about business, it's a story about freedom. Remember how our great-grandfathers said, "A chicken isn't a bird, the village isn't abroad." Today it sounds like a joke, but wisdom is hidden in those words. A chicken truly doesn't fly away. It stays close when everything else falls apart. It doesn't require gasoline, doesn't know the dollar, and doesn't watch the news. It doesn't care who is in power as long as there is ground under its feet. And maybe that's where its strength lies. It knows no crises. We can argue about politics, but one thing is certain. When real trouble comes, it's not the stock market that saves you, but a chicken egg laid in the nest in the morning. It's a simple miracle, repeating every day, and it's stronger than any inflation. By returning to it, we reclaim power over our lives. There is an old photograph taken in 1947 in a village near Smolensk. A woman in a padded jacket holds a chicken in her arms, and behind her is a crowd of children with buckets. This shot entered the agricultural archives as the restoration of livestock after the war. But if you look closely, it's not just a bird there, it's a symbol of the country's rebirth. In those years, the state was destroyed, but life was returning with the sound of crowing. In every yard stood sheds in which warmth stirred again. Chicks chirped in cardboard boxes near the stove, and housewives knew, if there's a chicken in the house, there will be no hunger. Thus, a quiet economy was born without orders from above. It was an economy of instinct, of trust, of memory. Today, when we are frightened by inflation graphs and global food risks, it's worth remembering. A crisis is not news. A crisis is an exam on the ability to live humanely. And the chicken, as funny as it may sound, was and remains the main teacher in this course. While the industry feeds us the illusion of control, automated farms, digital platforms, smart waterers, nature remains a free laboratory. In it, everything is fine-tuned to the smallest detail. Take, for example, a chicken's thermoregulation. Its body is capable of maintaining a constant body temperature even during severe external fluctuations. In Kazakhstan and Altai, where winter reaches 40 degrees, domestic chickens survive thanks to natural thermogenesis, a special metabolism in which fatty tissue turns into energy faster than in any mammal. That's why birds in freezing regions don't freeze. They simply huddle together to exchange heat. Scientists from Novosibirsk once measured it. The temperature inside such a huddle is 16 degrees Fahrenheit, higher than the outside. It's a living battery created by evolution, requiring no electricity. Or take nutrition. A natural chicken is a universal recycler. It is capable of digesting up to 70% of plant fiber thanks to the enzyme cellulose, which has almost disappeared in factory lines due to artificial feeds. What the industry solves with additives and biostimulants, a backyard bird does on its own. Village chickens have a strong gastrointestinal tract. In the crop, the food softens, then passes into the muscular stomach, where it is ground by small stones. That's why they need gravel or sand. Without it, the bird doesn't absorb vitamins A and E. So when you give a chicken access to the ground, you aren't just letting it go for a walk. You are activating its natural laboratory. Now about vitamins. An egg is a concentrate of life, and its composition directly depends on how the bird lives. With free-range access, a yolk contains up to 0.5 milligram of carotenoids per egg, hence the rich color and aroma. It contains B vitamins, B2, B6, B12, niacin, folic acid, biotin, and choline. The latter is especially important. It prevents fatty liver in humans and improves memory. Egg white is rich in lysine and tryptophan, amino acids from which the body synthesizes serotonin, the happiness hormone. This is not a metaphor. An egg from a backyard hen literally makes you happier. Why isn't this in the supermarket? Because there, an egg is a product of a conveyor belt, not a living process. When a bird is kept in a cage, its diet is monotonous, its metabolism is slowed, and the content of proteins and phospholipids in the egg decreases. Moreover, factory eggs are often sterilized with ultraviolet light, killing micronutrients and changing the protein structure. But they shine beautifully on the shelf. Beauty in exchange for benefit, that's the industry formula. But there is another level of deception: economic. When corporations imposed hybrids and patents, they effectively put an end to family breeding. As recently as the 1970s in the Kursk and Minsk regions, there were folk breeding programs. The state provided the population with purebred roosters to improve the stock. Today, this is impossible. Hybrids do not produce stable offspring. This means the peasant can no longer be the master of his gene pool. Yet previously, even a child knew, leave 3 chicks from the best layer, and next year you'll have your own line. Here lies the main danger. We are losing not just a bird, we are losing the knowledge of how to be free. After all, a chicken coop is a small model of the economy. If you can feed yourself without a store, you are already autonomous. If you can share surplus with neighbors, you are already creating a mutual aid network. And when there are hundreds of such yards, the fear of a supply crisis disappears. This is exactly why large chains are so afraid of the private owner. They call it low efficiency, but in reality, it's about a loss of control. The practical side is simple. If you want to start, don't buy trendy hybrids. Find a grandmother who still has her chernushkas or kukushkas. Old breeds live longer and are hardier. For example, the Russian white can withstand temperatures down to 4 degrees Celsius without heating, and the Yurlov crower can lay eggs weighing up to 3.2 ounces, almost like duck eggs. These eggs are richer in micronutrients. They have more zinc, manganese, and iron. Orlov models are calm, resistant to disease, and perfect for northern regions. And if you live further south, try Uzbek or Tajik pastrushkas. They handle the heat perfectly and eat mostly greens and scraps. Don't chase productivity. 250 eggs a year from a healthy, long-lived bird is better than 350 from a sick and exhausted one. Besides, a good hen regulates its own cycle. It rests in winter and starts laying again in spring. This is a natural rhythm, and if you respect it, the bird will respond with longevity. An important point is the brooding instinct. Factory lines have almost lost it, but in village chickens, it is highly pronounced. When a layer sits on eggs, she creates a microclimate with a temperature of 99.5 degrees Fahrenheit and a humidity of about 60%. No incubator can precisely reproduce these fluctuations. That's why chicks hatched under a hen are stronger and friendlier. They hear her voice even inside the shell. Scientists call this maternal imprinting, and grandmothers simply called it the chicken is teaching the kids. Now, a bit of science. Domestic poultry has a unique gut microbiome. More than 800 species of bacteria provide digestion, immunity, and vitamin synthesis. When chickens are kept on antibiotics, these bacteria die. Then the factory is forced to add vitamins artificially. As a result, the egg is a dead product filled with chemistry. With a backyard hen, it's the opposite. Living soil, living feed, living microflora. That's why the egg is alive. And now the philosophy that you can't measure in grams. When you go out into the yard in the morning and the chickens run to you, they aren't just birds. It's a signal that you're plugged back into the circle of life. You hear them cooing, scratching in the dirt, and you realize that every bit of their labor turns into tomorrow's breakfast. At that moment, the feeling of helplessness vanishes. The world may crumble, the exchange rate may fall, but in your yard, production continues. Natural, independent, eternal. Maybe that's why authorities have always disliked backyard farming, because a free person doesn't need guardianship. They have their own sources of light, heat, and food. And where there is food, there is will. So our chicken coop isn't just a wooden shed, it's a fortress. It's a bank that knows no defaults. It's an archive of memory where survival recipes are stored. We aren't inventing anything new. We are simply reclaiming what was lost. And in this reclaiming is strength. If you listen to the village morning, it always has one thing: rhythm. A rooster's crow is not just a sound, it's the metronome of life, the biological clock that connects man and nature. And here's what's amazing. This rhythm, which for millennia set the movement of the village, is today again becoming a weapon of survival. When cities choke on prices, when stores turn into showcases of debt, a simple cluck, cluck, cluck in the backyard sounds like an act of resistance. Our grandmothers didn't know the word decentralization, but that's exactly what they practiced when they created their mini farms. Each family is its own autonomous system, each egg a brick in the wall of independence. Take, for example, the old breeding methods forgotten after the 1980s. In the villages of the Volga region in Stavropol, there was a concept of a chicken calendar. It wasn't about dates, but about signs. They started hatching chicks when the coltsfoot bloomed and stopped when the nightingale sang. This coincided with the optimal air temperature and daylight length. No thermometers, no sensors, only observation and memory. And it worked. Moreover, such chicks grew faster because they were born in resonance with the season. Nature doesn't make mistakes, only man does, trying to speed it up. Now a bit of practice. Want chickens to lay year-round? Forget about electric lamps and artificial additives. Give them a natural rhythm. Let them rest and regain strength in winter. During this period, it's useful to give them grains with high-fat content: oats, sunflower seeds, flax seeds. These products not only warm them from the inside, but also enrich the eggs with omega-3 acids. In spring, switch to protein feeds, legumes, fish meal, fly larvae. More on them later. Such a cycle copies natural phases, and the bird responds with gratitude, a stable clutch, strong immunity, and a long life. And now about larvae. Once considered a dirty method, today it's a discovery for sustainable agriculture. In Tajikistan and southern Kazakhstan, they still put out boxes of organic waste where black soldier flies, Hermetia, congregate. Their larvae process the waste and become high-protein feed, up to 45% protein. In Europe, people get grants for this, but our grandmothers always did it, just without the scientific terms. This is an example of how knowledge passed down orally is now returning as innovation. The biological mechanism is simple. When a chicken gets protein from a natural source, its body produces more of the enzyme albumin, which means the egg becomes denser and more nutritious. And if you add a bit of green mass, nettle, dandelion, clover, the yolk takes on a rich color thanks to lutein and xanthophyll. These pigments not only add brightness, but also protect the human body from retinal aging. That is, every homemade omelet is a prevention for nearsightedness and fatigue. In Soviet times, even kindergartens knew this. In the 1950s, there was an Eggs for Children program that used products exclusively from collective farm backyards. Reports stated the incidence of vitamin deficiency decreased by 38%. Today, this is not remembered because factory eggs are cheaper, but only on the surface. In reality, we pay with our health. Now let's talk about water. It's the most underrated element. Many beginner poultry farmers lose productivity not realizing that a chicken is a water-based creature. It is 70% moisture, and any deficiency immediately hits egg production. Old poultry books used to say, a chicken without water is like a stove without fuel. To maintain egg production, 2 parts water are required for 1 part feed, but not just any water. Clean chlorine-free water. The best option is settled or collected rainwater. Its structure is softer, and the bird's body absorbs it better. Once a week, you can add a spoonful of apple cider vinegar per liter. This maintains the acid-base balance and prevents infections. The secret of rural farms is in simple solutions. In winter, put waterers in boxes of sand so the water doesn't freeze. In summer, cover them with a board so they don't heat up. Everything genius comes from observation, not from an instruction manual. Another detail is ash. Its role cannot be overstated. In the old days, they said, without ash, a chicken doesn't chicken. Bathing in ash is not entertainment. It's parasite prevention and a source of calcium, potassium, and phosphorus. Take an old trough, fill it with ash and sand 1 to 1, and your chickens will perform beauty treatments themselves. The plumage will become dense and shiny, and the risk of skin mites will vanish, and it's free. When I talk about this at meetings with farmers, many are surprised. Is it really that simple? Yes, simple. The only problem is that we were taught not to trust the simple. We believe the label more than the land. It seems to us that without instructions, nothing works. But the village has always been a university where you learn through hands, eyes, and smell. There, knowledge isn't written down. It's absorbed. And here's the paradox. The more technological the world becomes, the more people return to this way of learning. Young people, tired of offices, leave for the countryside and get chickens. They aren't looking for profit, but for meaning, and they find it. Because the moment you first collect a warm egg from a nest, something ancient happens. The feeling of prosperity returns. Real prosperity, not from a store, but from labor. But for a chicken to feed you, it needs safety. This is another lesson forgotten by the city. A good coop isn't the one that looks pretty on social media, but the one where the bird feels peace, without drafts, without dampness, with a high perch so as not to fear rats and foxes. Soviet handbooks recommended placing perches at a level of 2.3 feet and providing each bird with at least 8 inches of space. Simple numbers, but they determine whether your bird will lay eggs or sit in stress. Separately about nests. The best is wooden, with bedding made of hay or sawdust. If you want the eggs to be clean and the chickens not to break the shells, put a ceramic decoy egg in there. Chickens instinctively lay near an already deposited clutch. Old housewives would even put an onion in there if they didn't have a decoy, and it worked. Nature understands symbols, even if man has forgotten their meaning. And finally, the philosophy of exchange. In difficult times, eggs were exactly what became currency. In Belarus in the 1990s, they were used at the market to pay for flour, in the Caucasus, for gasoline, in Kazakhstan, for building materials. Today, when prices are rising again, a home egg becomes that same symbol of an honest product that can be exchanged without intermediaries. This isn't just barter, it's a return to human relationships. And when you trade a dozen eggs for a jar of honey, you aren't making a deal. You're restoring a chain of trust. The world is experiencing a crisis of technology, but not a crisis of meaning. We already have everything we need. We just stop looking down at our feet where our feathered allies roam. A chicken doesn't know inflation, doesn't require logistics, and doesn't depend on the dollar exchange rate. It's an ideal economist because it turns trash into protein. And if we learn to work with it again, rather than against it, no global instability will frighten us. There is an old proverb, the chicken feeds the house while the mistress feeds the chicken. In it is the entire philosophy of sustainability. This is not just a play on words, but a formula of folk economy tested by droughts, wars, and reforms. In every generation, there were those who thought small-scale farming was a relic. And then a crisis would hit, and it was these relics that pulled the country out of hunger. When markets collapsed and only canned food remained in stores, the village yard turned into a biofactory. Eggs, meat, feathers, manure for the garden. Everything closed into a circle where there was no waste because life itself cannot tolerate a void. Today, we stand at the threshold again. In the cities, high costs and uncertainty. In the villages, peace and knowledge that no one has patented. How many people are now looking for alternative protein sources, spending billions on lab-grown meat, when the answer is under every lean-to in any Russian, Belarusian, or Ukrainian village? But the industry is not interested in a simple solution because simple doesn't sell. Therefore, the science of housekeeping disappeared from schools, and instead of a labor lesson, we got a lesson in consumption. Yet in the old Soviet curriculum of the 1970s, it was directly stated, every personal plot can provide up to 60% of protein for a family of four. That is, the state itself recognized the value of private labor. Moreover, collective farms specifically distributed breeding roosters among families to preserve the gene pool. In the Kursk, Voronezh, and Gomel regions, such lines were preserved for decades. Back then, the chicken was part of state food security, but now, it's an act of personal resistance. But let's return to practice. How to make a chicken coop not just a place for chickens, but a full-fledged ecosystem where every detail works for benefit. Let's start with the basic elements. Bedding. The best thing nature invented is deep fermenting bedding. Pour a layer of sawdust, straw, and a little soil. In the process of life, bacteria begin to decompose the manure, releasing heat. As a result, the floor temperature stays around 77 degrees Fahrenheit, even in winter. The chickens warm themselves without electric heaters. Plus, the ammonia smell is neutralized naturally. You don't need to change the bedding completely, just add a fresh layer on top. In the Yaroslavl region, this method was called living floor. It was known even under the Tsar, but now it's becoming fashionable again as biotechnology. Light regime. In winter, when the day is short, don't turn on bright lamps. It's better to use a weak, diffused light for 2 to 3 hours in the morning and evening. Excessive lighting causes stress and exhaustion. The chicken should think the day has lengthened, but shouldn't be blinded by the lamp. This is an important balance that is forgotten at factories. There, the bird knows no night, so it burns out after a year. Ventilation. Fresh air is the main antiseptic. Make small windows under the roof, but without a draft. Open them during the day, even in winter. Humid air is the main enemy. Old housewives would put a jar of lime in the corner. It absorbs moisture. You couldn't think of anything cheaper or more reliable. Hygiene. We often think a chicken can endure anything, but cleanliness is not a luxury. It's a guarantee of health. Once a week, clean the feeders, wash the waterers, change the bedding in the nests. This prevents coccidiosis and intestinal diseases, which are especially dangerous in spring. By the way, prevention is also free. A little potassium permanganate in the water once a month, and you have a healthy flock. And now let's talk about the ration, the heart of the whole system. In the old days, there was no concept of commercial feed. There was mash, a mash of scraps, grains, grass, and oil cake. It contained everything needed. Take nettle, for example. It was dried in bunches under a lean-to, then crushed and added to the feed. Vitamin C, calcium, iron, all natural. Onion skins were added for immunity and corn for energy. In spring, boiled potatoes and bran. If this story changed your view on the common things in your yard, subscribe to the channel and give us a like. We are restoring the history and knowledge that they tried to consign to oblivion. Sow your future and be independent. The next vault of knowledge will open very soon.